Hi guys, this is the Briar McKenzie podcast and this is episode 2. So I thought to start off with I should tell you a little bit more about myself and a little bit touching on my testimony on how I came into the faith, because I think it's nice to sort of get to know who you're listening to a little bit. So I grew up in rural New Zealand with my mum, my dad and my 2 sisters, and we were a pretty tight-knit unit from a young age. We didn't have a lot of money in the house, but we didn't sort of miss out on anything. I have very fond memories of my childhood. Mum was a stay-at-home mum while dad worked a lot while we were younger. And yeah, so there was no faith or no religion of any sort in our household growing up. And even in our wider family, there wasn't any of this present. And when I don't know when I was first introduced to the concept and the idea of God, but I remember we had Bible in at school. I don't know if you guys did that, where I think it was on a Friday, someone would come and teach us like biblical stories. And I kind of found it, I didn't really take to it very well. I think I was I remember being a bit argumentative about it because I found it quite hard to conceptualize, and I thought it was a little bit of a myth. So it sort of went over my head, and I did sort of reject the idea of God when I was younger. But as life progressed, and like I'm sure many of you sort of go through ups and downs, I had some really hard times in my life, and I always was seeking something. When I look back, even from a young age, from when I was a teenager, I was really interested in reading like self-help books, how to be successful, how to live a fulfilled life, and all these sorts of things. I tried to find my identity in different things, whether that was people or a place or a job, and I changed my jobs a lot from when I was like a teenager until like recently, where I thought, oh, if I did this and I went there and lived there and did that job, that I'd find fulfillment if I, maybe if I did this. And I bounced around a lot in different places overseas and in different countries and in different jobs, trying to find, I guess, somewhere that felt like home or felt like, made me feel fulfilled, and I never found it. And I got myself caught up in a really bad place, a few years ago, where a couple of things were going on, a couple of things that had happened that were really bad. I had a bit of trauma. I was dealing with a really hard situation, and it took over my life. It took over my life, but it took over my mind. And there was such a war in my mind where it actually led me to like insanity, where I became so paranoid. I was so extremely paranoid. I had insomnia. I was constantly in fear. Like my body was just, I could not relax. When you're cold and you're shaking and you're sort of achy, I would have this feeling like in summer, like when it was warm, my body was constantly in fear, in like flight mode. It was terrible, and I was trying to cling on to things and seek the truth and seek comfort in things that were really bad for me, that were not good for me. And I became so lost. And I felt so down. And I didn't know how to come out of this situation where I was at such a war in my mind. And I remember I was living on my own, and I had just sat down on the couch one evening after work. I was working on a farm, and I was living on farm, so my house was on farm. So I remember coming home and I'd only just sat down and I was milling over the worry and, reliving the nightmares. And I was sort of in this really bad spot where I was kind of like self-pitying myself, and I was just sad and worried and like regretting and like in this sort of guilt, and it was terrible. And I remember it had only been maybe like 15 minutes I'd been thinking like this and in my own thoughts, and I'd been doing this for too long though. This had been going on for a few months, and I remember I noticed the wall in the corner of the room had started to shake, and I thought, oh, well, we're having an earthquake, because these aren't unusual in New Zealand. And so I looked around the room and I looked into the dining room, and I noticed that nothing was shaking in the dining room. And then I looked back and I realized that the shaking was only happening in the corner of the house, in the corner of the living room, and I felt this energy moving through the wall, rumbling the wall, and then exit. And the first thought on my mind was, oh my gosh, God is mad at me. And I remember thinking he had seen into my thoughts, and he knew that I was like, in this self-pity and this worry and this bad, ways of thinking. And I felt like he had seen me. And I remember I had lit a joint because I had this insomnia. I needed to quiet down the mind. So I remember I was drinking a lot and I was smoking a lot, so I could just like knock myself out and go to bed because it was terrible. And I remember I'd only just lit this joint, and I remember, because I felt so seen, I remember dabbing out the joint and being like, okay, I'm listening to you. And it really woke me up. I felt like my father had caught me doing something naughty or something, where he was like, stop it, like you're not going to do this anymore. You're not going to do this anymore. And I felt so seen. And I remember thinking, he must be real, like God must be real, because I've spoken to people since and they're like, are you sure it wasn't like something darker? But at this point I was still sober, and I've been in houses that have had like dark things going on, and it was not like that. It wasn't like this crippling fear it gave me. It made me feel like my father was like shaking me and being like, cut it out, you're not going to do this anymore. And so that became the catalyst for my whole life changing in the best way possible. It just woke me up. It woke me out of this like slumber I was sort of in. And I remember I started to just rethink my whole life. And I'm not saying that, I had the revelation of God and then I just all of a sudden had this motivation and I became like good overnight. This took time. Like this happened, and then I still let a whole lot of things get in the way of me pursuing Jesus. But it was a really important moment in the beginning of me coming to the Lord. And I wavered a bit for maybe like the next year, where I was sort of like, okay, like I'm like, you're real, you exist, but I didn't prioritize him at all, and I was still caught up in my mess. But what I found was, the more I tried to do things in my own strength, in my own way, it wasn't helping. Even if I changed my situations around, nothing was making me feel at ease in my mind. And I remember being like, I actually remember something, sorry, I've just kicked the thing and my camera's moved. I remember seeing something come up on my Instagram, and it was a guy talking about a study that they had done where they got two groups of people, of like 50 people or something it was, and they had real stable sort of home lives and stuff. And for one group of them, none of these people ever read the Bible or were in any religion or anything like this. And they got one group of people to read the Bible and pray for, I think it was maybe like half an hour a day or something like this. And then the other group just didn't. They just went about their day, and they then did brain scans on both groups of people, and they noticed after 8 weeks, only 8 weeks of them sticking to this consistently, that loneliness decreased in the they could see it in the brain. Loneliness decreased, depression decreased, anxiety decreased. There were all these things that are like, these mental things that we all struggle with, that just seemed to slowly come away as these people were reading their Bible and praying to God. And I thought, I could do with a bit of that in the situation that I'm in. I could do with a bit of that. I was desperate, and I was just willing to try it. So that's what I did. I was like, I kind of treated it like, if you wanted to lose weight or get fit, you're like, okay, I can't see now what I'm going to be, but if I just have faith that if every day I go to the gym and I, work out, or if I start eating this way, eventually I'm going to start to see the benefits and the difference coming in. So that's what I did. And I remember I found the Bible quite hard to conceptualize and to read. It was very heavy. So I remember I downloaded the Holy Bible app, and they have a daily verse. And even if it was a sentence, I would just read the sentence and try to understand that one sentence, get it into my mind, and then I would pray after. And even if I didn't think about God for the rest of the day, I remember feeling like in this moment that I was in prayer and I was reading this verse, that I just felt this like comfort, and I clung on to it because I knew that it comforted me. And so if I'd had a bad day, I would sit down and I'd open up my app and I'd try to like just be present with it. And as time went on and I stuck to this consistently, I was like yearning for it more, where I would come home from work and I'd get straight down on my knees and I'd pray, and I'd just be like, thank him for, what he's done in my life, and also like just talk to him about my woes and the things that worried me and the things that were hurting me, and what does he want from me. And slowly after time, I started to kind of articulate my prayers a little bit better and start to try to hear him and see what he was doing in my life. Because what you end up learning is, when you come into the faith, like, God talks to you in more ways that you would ever realize. And I don't mean like necessarily physically talking, like a voice inside your head, but he will drop crumbs for you, and he will try to awaken your mind to things as you go about your day. And I asked him to help me to become more in tune with this. And as I went along, I remember looking back and thinking, I feel so at peace in myself. I feel so at peace. And I had never experienced that before in my whole entire life. And I remember reading verses and reading bits of the Bible, and they keep talking about this peace. And I thought, why do they keep raving on about this peace? And I didn't understand it. And what I thought peace was when you have a lifestyle and you're not super busy and you don't have all these crazy things going on and you're not rushing around. And that kind of was my life. Like, I was living on the farm and I was just working long hours, and I didn't have all this, busyness going on. My routine was pretty simple. But inside my mind, it was chaos. It was chaos, and I was constantly toying with it. And what I found is, I remember looking back and thinking, it's just quietened down. Like, the noise, the guilt, the fear, the sadness, the anger, the frustration, everything just quietened down. And what was so cool about it is, there was still stuff going on in my life that was chaotic and was not good, but I felt the peace of God. And they say it surpasses all understanding, because it does. Because what's cool about it, you can still have like chaos going on around you, but if you're anchored in Christ, that protects you from it just really disrupting the mind. And so I saw his truth again coming through and thinking, whoa, the only thing I've changed in my life is I've started praying to you and I've started reading your word. And so I was like, this must be real. And so I just stuck to it. And so I was like, okay, this is cool. I really love this feeling. I've never experienced this before. And I want more of it. And so I, like, you know, week after week, day after day, my sort of motivation to know him more and to understand the Bible more and just be closer to it just grew immensely over such a short amount of time. And now, fast track, 12 months, I am, on fire for the Lord, and more every day he shows me his love and his truth, and I'm so blown away. Like, sometimes it's overwhelming what he does for the people that prioritize him, you know. And I can't thank him enough for where he's led me. And I can't be quiet about it, because I just know from like the things that was happening in my life and the chaos in my mind, I know that there's people out there that are experiencing the same thing or have trauma from going through things in their past that they can't move on from, whether that's emotions that they can't get under control, like anger and rage and violence or whatever it is. I gotta let you guys know that there is so much freedom in the name of Jesus, and he is so good. And I really would love you all to experience his truth and his love. He is our Holy Father. He is our Father, and he wants to know you. He wants to have a relationship with you, and he wants to help you. He doesn't want us to suffer, you know. And as I came into faith, I started to realize, when I was like, okay, there's heaps of things I don't agree with, and things that I didn't want to be obedient in. I didn't understand how he was like, you know, I don't want you to be getting drunk like this. I don't want you sleeping with, you know, people or feeling like you have to do those things. And as I started to like yield to his way and be like, okay, I am just going to be obedient to you, like everything just quietened down, and I felt so at peace. And I started to feel just joy in knowing him. And there's a reason why he does put these boundaries in place. It's not so that we have to stay boring and down and stay suppressed for the rest of our lives. It's so we don't have to be hurt, because when we do these things, this is how we get hurt, and it leads to destruction. And he wants to protect our hearts and our mind. And that is what he's shown me, is everything that he does, everything that he wants from us, every way in which he wants us to be obedient to him is for our own good. And it is. And I really needed to share that with you guys. And I won't go on anymore. But I really hope through these episodes you can see like Jesus's heart in it and his truth. But thank you for listening if you're staying to the end, and I'm sorry for getting emotional, but I will see you on the next one for episode 3. Bless and love to you all.